I was home alone one night during winter break. I was watching TV in our sunroom, which is like a smaller living room type space which we use as a TV and movie room. There was also a door to the side driveway in this room. I had all the blinds shut and was under a blanket, watching some random movie I don't even remember, and out of nowhere the lights turn on outside. We have a motion sensing light out there, so the fact that it turned on was concerning. I had to lower the volume on the TV. 2. Listen up for any possible sounds. It was unlikely I'd hear anything from outside, though, so I lifted the blinds briefly, just to do a quick check. It was clear. There was no way that I know of to shut off that light, so as annoying as it was, I just had to wait. I figured it was a raccoon or a possum or something that might have triggered the light, though. The more I thought about it, the less that made sense, so I put on my shoes and just walked around the driveway to ease my mind. No one was there, so I could go back to watching TV with a clear head. Some time passed and I suddenly heard a bucket full of something fall over outside, and then the motion sensing light turned back on. The first time it happened I was concerned, but now I was straight up scared someone or something was out there. I was hoping it was an animal, but I really started to doubt it. I didn't want to get up because the couch was actually the only blind spot from the door to the side, and I had a fear of getting up and seeing somebody standing at that door. I wanted to shut the TV now, but the remote was in the middle of the coffee table, and I was afraid to even move that much. I looked to the blinds, which were fully pulled shut. However, I wasn't looking at the blinds, I was looking at what I saw through the blinds. It was a perfect outline of a person standing on the other side with their arms stretched out a bit from their body. I don't know how to describe in writing how I felt in that moment. There was an intense feeling in my heart and stomach area, and I felt like it was harder to breathe. That's how scared I was. I got up from the couch as quietly as I could, but before I could even get to the door that separates the sunroom and the dining room, the person on the other end started knocking aggressively on the window. I wanted to scare them away. Somehow I was too scared to go out there, so I screamed in a shaky voice, and calling the cops, I stood by the doorway for a second to see if they stopped, and they did, but I saw the shadow beyond the blinds moved towards the door. I saw some old crazy-looking woman with wiry hair on the other side of the door. For a moment I felt less intimidated, and so she started banging on the glass of my door with both hands, screaming as if she were mental. I slammed the door to the sunroom and called 911, reporting some crazy, mental old woman attempting to break into my house. I was told to wait in a safe locked room with a weapon to defend myself until the police arrived. A new nightmare I ever had about a break-in came true when I heard glass shattering outside of the bathroom. I waited a minute after not hearing anything to slowly and quietly unlock and open the bathroom door. I peered into my living room, and there she was, the old woman with the wiry hair, standing in the middle of my living room in front of a broken window. She spotted me when I had the door open and came rushing over to the door. Out back, they assured me they'd be okay and they'll be right here. The knocking at the door stopped, and then sudden commotion was taking place outside. I heard the two cops scream at the woman to step away from the door. When I stepped out from the bathroom, the two cops had the insane woman detained. I'd imagine they did it pretty easily. The woman looked at me with a look of crazy in her eyes, and I looked away. It turned out the old woman who lived in a nearby house with some woman who never a big property in the rural part of New York, and I go up there a bunch of times a year in the winter months to go skiing. There's a neighbor up there that I never spoken to once. There's a fence that separates our 2 yards. Then on the other sides of my house is woods 4 miles. There's another neighbor further down the road across the street, and I'd met him a number of times because he happens to go skiing too, so we got to know each other based off that. I went up this past January 4. The first time in the season. As I walked up to the front door, I heard a kid laughing nearby in the neighbor's house's direction. I figured they had kids, which was news to me. Stepping into the house for the first time each season was always weird. A house that would be empty for a majority of the year, so I'd have to turn on the water and heat and everything. Of course, the first night I slept like a baby after the 4-hour drive from Connecticut. The next morning, after eating breakfast and changing them to my ski gear, I went outside and found a big red ball sitting in the snow on my front lawn. Wasn't there the day before, so I assumed it belonged to the neighbors. I took the ball and threw it over the fence separating our properties, and I went off to the ski lodge to meet my friends, and we spent the day skiing. When I got back, it was dark out. I eaten dinner with my friends, so I was ready to go to bed. Walking to the front door, I noticed that once again that big red ball was sitting on my front lawn. Howie was getting a bit odd, but once again I threw that red ball over the fence. I woke up in the middle of that night to laughing outside, a kid's laughter. It was like 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. I kept playing outside, made no sense. I went to look out my window. I couldn't see any kids though, and now the laughter had stopped. However, I did see something sitting on my front lawn. I couldn't tell from the window, so I went outside into the snow in my slippers and The child's laughter I kept hearing and the ball that kept ending up on my lawn. He told me there were no kids around there. I got chills again. I thanked him, shook his hand, and went back to my house. I left the red ball in my living room and drove back up the mountain and had another day of skiing with my friend. When I got back to the house that night, I was completely exhausted and ready to go home. The next day, I threw all my stuff on the couch and figured I'd pack it all up tomorrow. It literally crashed into the bed as my whole body was sore and I fell asleep like a baby. Except I woke up to a kid's laughter outside again. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window to look outside. There was the red ball sitting in the snow. Again, I ran to the living room and tore the room upside down looking for the ball. I still know to this day I'd left it in there when I left, but it wasn't there now. I suddenly didn't feel alone in the house. I turned on every light as I packed up all my wet gear into my bag. I threw everything in the bag so I'd be ready to go if hit the fan. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and they were, so it made no sense. I left the lights on and went back to my room, shutting off only those lights. I looked out the window, and far behind the red ball I was in the snow was what looked like a kid just standing stiff looking towards my window. I ducked down and closed the blinds. I closed the blinds to every window in my house. I tried my best to just go to sleep and ignore it. It was a long hour before my exhaustion overcame my fear and I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning, skipped breakfast, packed up the car and spent the hell away from there, not looking back to the red ball that was still on my front lawn. I've never had anything to be stolen in that house, so I was okay with leaving it in the situation. Either way, I can't figure out how whoever was out there got into my house to take the ball out in. As recent as 2 weeks ago, actually, we didn't see him unpacking or anything. We never even saw what he looked like. You didn't even know if he was a man or a woman or how many people moved in, but I say he because obviously we found out eventually. So on the third day, George and I actually went next door to introduce ourselves, but he didn't answer the door. He was home. His car was in the driveway. We figured maybe he just couldn't answer it for whatever reason. As we were walking back down the driveway, George stopped me and told me under his breath to look at the window next to the front door. I looked and saw a kink in the blinds. A man was holding it up and staring through it like a creep. George and I looked at each other and kept walking, agreeing that was both insanely awkward and creepy. Now we knew already he was not going to be the best of neighbors. That night at around 1 o'clock in the morning, I just started hearing noises coming from outside. It's warm where we live year-round, so the windows are always open. I went to go look outside, and my room is upstairs, so it kind of overlooks the neighbor's backyard, which was where the sound was coming from. I saw the neighbor. He was some big-looking guy wearing a hoodie with the hood up, which was weird given that it was like 72 degrees out and he was sawing a big piece of wood. It was a ridiculous scene. I went to go knock on George's door. Apparently he was already awake from the noise too. He had work early the next morning, and what this guy was doing at this hour was nuts, and it went on for some time. We agreed to go over and ask him politely to stop. Since he was outside, we knocked on the gate instead of the door. Just as we did, the song stopped. He expected the gate to open any second, but it never did. At least the song stopped though, so we went back to sleep. It wasn't until a few nights later that we heard noises in the middle of the night again. I woke up but couldn't figure out what the sounds were right away. Not until I got to the window and realized the sounds were screams. Screaming seemed to be coming from inside the house next door, and I saw the neighbor outside in his backyard again. He was hurrying into his house, but he was dragging something. I couldn't tell what. Then he stopped and looked up at my window and moved away from the window. As soon as I realized, I ran to George's door. He was already awake for the noises too. He got on the phone with the police right away to report this. I stood right by his door, away the whole time listening, and there was a slam from downstairs. It was her back door. We looked at each other with horrified looks on our faces. George yelled into the phone to send help because the man just entered our house. While he stayed on the phone with the cops, I went to the hallway and then to the stairway. I looked down the stairs and listened. There was creaking the floorboards down there. I tiptoed back to George's room and shut the door. He told the woman on the line to have the police come in through the back to her immediately and then hung up. There's no lock on his door, so we pushed up against the door in case, God forbid, the man tried to open it. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs fast and the bathroom door opened, but stuff son move quickly to George's door. We began to push as hard as we could. The man tried pushing the door open, ramming it and then hitting it with some kind of blunt objects. That was the exact reason we didn't try to overpower him. We didn't know what kind of weapons he could have. No matter what he did though, he couldn't push through the door. We heard him go downstairs and all was quiet. A few minutes passed and we finally decided to open the door and peek outside. It wasn't in the hallway. Suddenly we heard a man yell police and a deep commanding voice. George and I ran downstairs in relief. When we got there we didn't see any police. I notice Right away, however, that someone was hiding behind our dining room table. I told George to run back upstairs with me, and the man hiding behind the table got up and chased us up the stairs. This time we went to the bathroom where we could at least lock the door, but we weren't in there for long because once again we heard someone shout police downstairs. This time for real, the man banging on the door stopped, and there was silence upstairs, George, and I screamed up here, and the two police officers came up the stairs, yelling at the man to drop his weapon. We heard the sound of a knife being dropped to the floor, and when the police told us to come out, we did. It brought him out to the police car in cuffs and put him in the back seat. We told the officers to check his house because we heard screams. They went in with guns drawn as another cop car pulled up in front of our house, and then 2 more cop cars pulled up 2 minutes later. We were shocked to see the cops come out of the house with a woman crying hysterically. She had been locked in his basement and she was pressed up against the door screaming as loud as she could. There was also a dead body in the bag the men had been dragging in the backyard. He didn't find out the whole story behind who this woman was or who the dead body was, but we're pretty sure the man was going to jail for life. The house is now back up for rent and we're just hoping somebody normal moves in.